I'd like to welcome you. My name is Katie Getz, and I'm with the New Mexico Department of Agriculture. This afternoon, I'm wearing the hat of the Southwest Drought Learning Network. I'll share a bit about that network with you in just a moment. The real purpose that we all gather here today is to hear a presentation on what's called Soil for Water. It's a project of the National Center for Appropriate Technology. We'll be hearing from two people from Ncat this afternoon. That's Mike Morris and Kara Kroeger. Then I'll turn it over to my co-lead for the Drought Learning Network's Drought and Agriculture team. That's Sky Aney. So we'll be wrapping up with a question and answer session this afternoon. Sky comes to us from USDA's Southwest Climate Hub. We hope to keep you for just about an hour this afternoon, again, inclusive of the presentation we'll hear, as well as your questions and some answers to those questions. A bit about the Drought Learning Network. That is the platform from which we are hosting, or that is hosting this afternoon's webinar. It was formed just a little more than a year and a half ago in Las Cruces, New Mexico, but bringing together parties from across the Southwest. The Drought Learning Network's mission is simple. It's to serve as a point of linkage between climate service providers and resource managers. And the purpose is twofold. It's to increase landscape resilience, so the resilience of our natural resource base, as well as our community resilience, the resilience of we the people against current drought and against future drought. That's really the mission of the Drought Learning Network. Were you to visit this website, which I'll be dropping into the chat here in a moment, you'll find a lot of resources available to you, including webinars like this one this afternoon, as well as podcasts, some drought tools, case studies, published literature, and even some educational resources. So I invite you to check that out when you have some time. As I said, the purpose we are gathered here for today is to hear about the Soil for Water project. So let me introduce to you this afternoon's speakers. First off is Mike Morris. He's the Southwest Regional Director for the National Center for Appropriate Technology, or Ncat for short. And Mike has led more than 30 projects on topics such as irrigation efficiency, solar energy, organic farming, local food, and even crop insurance reform. Mike's recent work has focused on regenerative agriculture and its potential to mitigate water scarcity and climate change. And he comes to us from Durango, Colorado this afternoon. After we hear from Mike, we'll turn it over to Kara Kroeger, who's also with Ncat. Kara's mission is to create awareness of human, animal, and ecosystem health through regenerative agriculture education. She's a sustainable agriculture specialist at Ncat's office in San Antonio, Texas. And in that position, she promotes holistic management tools that lead to improved soil health and ecosystem function with this intention, increasing the nutrient density of food. Her work at Ncat includes overseeing the Soil for Water initiative as its program coordinator. And Kara is also a certified herbalist, nutritionist, and chef. So welcome, Mike and Kara. I'll turn it over to you both.
Well, thank you, Katie, and thanks to the Drought Learning Network and the Southwest Climate Hub for putting on this webinar and giving us a chance to tell you about our project. Go ahead, advance the slide, please, Sky. Okay, if you're not familiar with Ncat, we're a nonprofit organization. We have regional offices around the country, and we have two main programs, one in sustainable agriculture and the other in sustainable energy. We run the ATRA information service, which some of you are probably familiar with for the USDA rural development, and we've been running that since 1987. And I would encourage you to check out the ATRA website. We have hundreds of publications, videos, and other tools to support farmers and ranchers who are interested in making their operations more sustainable. Go ahead, Sky. What I want to do in my first 15 minutes of the presentation is try to convince you, if you don't already believe it, that healthy soil is a powerful, low cost, and I'd say greatly underutilized water conservation tool. And I thought I'd start with these two quotes. First one comes from a farmer named Dale Strickler. He said, "In college, I was taught that while it's possible to increase soil organic matter, it would never be economically feasible to do so. The psychological effect of that statement was to convince generations of farmers that increasing soil organic matter is an unachievable goal, so don't even bother to try. And my second quote comes from a woman named Sandra Postel, who I'm sure many of you know is one of the world's leading experts on water conservation. In fact, she just received the Stockholm Water Prize, which is the so-called Nobel Prize for water conservation. And she said in a book she just recently wrote, at the Quivira Coalition Conference in 2012, I realized how blinkered I had been about agricultural water use. Despite having written on the topic for many years, I had researched how to get more crop per drop through efficiency and judicious irrigation. What I had neglected, though, was the importance of repairing the soil reservoir itself, the living matrix that holds water in its pores and absorbs it like a sponge. Now, what these two quotes are telling me, at least, is that this idea of using soil health as a water conserving tool is sort of surprisingly new, both to farmers as well as to some of the leading water professionals around the world. Go ahead, Sky. So let's get a few basics out there. How much water does an acre of soil actually hold? Well, obviously it depends on the soil and many other factors. I just put up some textbook values, and without worrying too much about the specifics, we're talking about some big numbers. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of gallons of water in each foot of soil depth in an acre of soil. And just also notice that it depends on how you really look at it. If you're talking about saturated soil, that's the top of those bars. If you're, you could be talking about field capacity, which is the point at which the soil stops draining. And also notice that soil holds a lot of water which is not available to plants. And so the blue area shows you the plant available water. And as you can see in most soils, really in all soils, that's only a fraction of all the water that's been held in soil. But the main point here is just that soils can definitely hold an awful lot of water. Go ahead, Sky. Okay, is it possible to increase infiltration and water holding capacity of soil? Can we increase those numbers in the last slide? Well, to answer that question, you need to, of course, recognize that those are two different things. Infiltration is that downward movement of water through the soil profile pulled down by gravity. And then water holding capacity is the sponge effect, the soil sponge effect, the ability of soil to hold water. And the answer is yes to both questions. We have now many credible reports from around the world about increasing both infiltration and the water holding capacity of soil. And what's been really interesting is that we're hearing about people who've been able to do this in a relatively short period of time. I'm just going to give you a couple of these stories. First one is from Gabe Brown, who's now a now famous farmer from North Dakota, who over about an 18-year period increased the average organic matter levels on his farm from 2% to 5% and up to 11% in some of his fields. And as I'll show you in a minute, that has a big effect on soil's water holding capacity. Even more remarkable, at least to me, his infiltration rates increased from about 1/2 inch per hour when he first started operating that farm to over 8 inches per hour. So that's over about an 18-year period. And this was all carefully measured by NRCS and university researchers. And if you've never heard that story before, I hope you'll take a minute to sort of let that sink in and just sort of imagine how it would change the hydrology of a farm, a watershed, or any kind of a landscape when infiltration would change so dramatically from just 1/2 inch per hour to 8 inches per hour. The second story is from Texas. It's the Texas Hill Country. In 1969, a gentleman named David Bamberger bought the worst piece of land he could find in the Texas Hill Country, He made a lot of management changes, including revegetating large areas with native grasses. And as a result of that work, a lot of the springs and creeks on the property began flowing again. And he wrote a book about it, or a book was written about it called Water from Stone. Third, I wanted to mention a very famous gentleman you probably all know, Alan Savory, who is the founder, of course, of Holistic Management International and other organizations. And I'm sure many of you have heard his now famous TED Talk on reversing desertification. So from Savory and his many followers, we have literally hundreds of stories around the world now about deserts returning to grassland and springs flowing again. And then finally, I'll just come back to Dale Strickler again and mention that over an 11-year period, he's a Nebraska farmer, and he increased his water holding capacity in the root zone of his crops from about 3 inches of water all the way up to 12 inches. So, and like Gabe Brown, he immediately noticed that this had a great impact on his crop yields, which were much higher than his neighbors during drought periods. So we have many remarkable stories now from around the world about increases in both infiltration and water holding capacity. Next slide, please. Okay, well, let's connect that to soil health and to our project. In our project, we follow the NRCS standard definition of healthy soil, which is basically soil that carries out a variety of functions. And 5 of the main functions are listed there, which include regulating water flow and cycling, sustaining diverse plant and animal life, filtering and buffering potential pollutants, cycling nutrients, and providing physical stability and support. And the way I think about our project is that we're essentially promoting soil health like many other great organizations, but we do that with a very strong focus on that water cycling function of healthy soil. And then at the bottom, I'm sure most of you know, there are now 5 widely accepted principles of soil health. And these are keeping the soil covered, minimizing soil disturbance, increasing biodiversity, keeping continual live plant roots in the ground, and integrating livestock into farming. Next slide, please. Okay, well, can we get any more specific about how we can get more water into our soil? And that's where we really turn soil into a water conservation tool. We turn it into a way to hold water and to build resilience against drought. And yeah, there are many proven ways of doing this. I put several of them on the list. I won't read them all to you. You'll notice I put adding organic matter up at the top. That's well proven. And it's also, of course, integral to many of the other items on that list, things like composting and mulches. But adding organic matter is not the only way we can increase water holding and infiltration rates in soil. The other point I want to make is that all of these are, although they're generally well understood, they're all highly site specific. And so there's a great deal that we don't know. We're only beginning to learn about how to use these methods in particular locations. So depending on your soil, depending on your climate, depending on your slope, and many, many other factors, some of these may work better than others, some may not work at all. And so one flip side of that is that there is now a large and really rapidly growing body of experiential knowledge. And this is not knowledge that's being published in our academic journals, but it's knowledge that's being learned by land managers and farmers and ranchers who are discovering how to use these tools to their maximum effect. Next slide, please. Okay, how much unhealthy soil is out there? Well, I mean, a lot. And if we just look at our rangelands first, and of course, from our perspective, we view these as a conservation opportunity. So this slide comes from NRCS, and it shows the percentage of rangeland in the West that is at least moderately departed from reference conditions of healthy rangeland. And these conditions relate to soil stability, hydrologic functioning, and biotic integrity. And of course, all of those are directly related to soil health. So in this map, darker colors are bad. Orange means you have 10 to 50% or more of the rangeland is impacted, is degraded, is far from normalcy. And the yellow areas are also somewhat damaged, but less than 10% of the acre. Next slide, please. Slide shows a percentage of crops county by county low in most parts of our country. And that tells us that only a really small percentage of our acreage is even following that very first principle of soil health, which is keeping the surface of the soil covered. Okay, one more, next slide, please. Just for fun, I did some back of the envelope calculations of what it would take to capture in soil the full water capacity of Lake Powell, which of course is the second largest reservoir in the United States. And again, it depends, of course, on the soil, but I put a chart there on the left showing some, again, textbook lookup values for what the impact is on water holding capacity when you add organic matter to soil. And as you can see, you gain about 0.4 to or 0.3 to a half an inch or so of water for every 1% organic matter that you increase. If you go from 1% to 2%, you're going to add something like that amount of water holding capacity. So I took conservative values, and it turned out to be, at least to me, a surprisingly small amount of land, a little over 700,000 acres. You could store, if all you did was increase that by 1% organic matter, you could store about as much water as we are, as the full capacity of Lake Powell. And as an example, that's only less than 1% of the farmland in the state of California. So I'm not arguing here we should, stop storing water in our reservoirs, but I'm simply trying to make the point that there is a huge potential, huge conservation potential. And I think you saw in the last two slides, there's a huge conservation opportunity. There's a tremendous amount of land that's available and ready to have its water storage increased. Next slide, please. Last thing I'm going to do before I turn it over to Kara is just tell you how our project got started. It started during the Texas drought, which ran basically from 2011 to about 2014. It was a devastating drought. It impacted some other states as well. Certainly it was horrible for farms and ranches across the state. And in 2012, the state of Texas wrote a new state water plan, and they concluded that the state needed to find 8 million new acre feet of water just to meet the expected demand by the year 2060. And they talked about, new dams, pipelines, carrying water across the state, desalination of groundwater and seawater, seeding clouds to increase rainfall, everything you could imagine. There were 562 project ideas, and the idea of improving soil health to catch water was really not mentioned at all. I mean, it was really not even considered in that state water plan. And at that time, several of us got together and we just, we had some meetings, and we really started this project just because we thought this idea of catching more water in soil was being somewhat overlooked, and it deserved more attention. It had potential to play a constructive role. So the goal of our project from the very beginning has been very simply to catch and hold more water in soil wherever and however we can. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kara, and she can tell you a lot more about our project.
All right, so Sky, you can go to the next slide if you'd like. Thank you. Oh, actually, that's Mike's slide. Mike, you want to do this last one?
Oh. Sure. I was just going to add on that at all, we're currently creating some new ones of our own. And the final, just sort of the obvious question is, wouldn't it be a cost-effective strategy for drought mitigation to teach landowners how to catch and hold more water in their own soil? Sorry, I'll turn it over to you now, Kara.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next slide, please. All right, everybody, hello, my name is Kara, and I'm glad to be here with you all today. So I just want to continue on for a minute on soil health before I start talking a little bit more about the Soil for Water project and what we do. But I wanted to talk about soil and how it pertains to water holding, as Mike has been talking. So I was recently reading a publication by Walter Jenney that likened soil to a cathedral. And I really love this analogy because it makes a lot of sense to me. And so I found these two pictures to compare each other side by side. And one of the things that he says is that what is so awe-inspiring about cathedrals are the voids and the ethereal spaces that are made, the nothingness that they create. And it's not the bricks and the cements per se, but the big space that when you walk in, it feels awe-inspiring. And so well-aggregated soils can be like a cathedral, and the mineral particles in the soil are like the stones of a cathedral. And in addition to that, the soil organic matter is similar to the cement that holds the stones together. So as Mike was saying, by just adding a small amount of the soil organic matter, whether it's 1, 2, or 3%, each of those is very significant. It fundamentally changes the structure of the soil, creating those spaces. So the organic matter cement between the mineral components is going to enable us to develop these massive, beautiful spaces. And about 66% of healthy soil, if you're looking at bulk density, we want about 66% of soil to be air and nothingness, because that's going to allow the water to infiltrate and be retained in those spaces and then made available over time. So another factor that's attributed to this space is that it relates to nutrient availability. And when healthy soil has these spaces, you're going to see an increase in the mineral surface area being exposed. And when that mineral surface area is exposed in those little spaces and water can come down in it, it allows those nutrients to be carried more efficiently and for the cations to come off of those mineral particles and become nutrients for the plant. And so uptake and cycling are more efficient when you have soil porosity happening. And so more than 80% of soil's biofertility is going to depend on the surface exposure in the soil. And it's very important. And we can oftentimes not add soil fertilizer when soil is working in good condition, because this mineral nutrient uptake and cycling is going to be working more efficiently. So the need to add fertilizer decreases. So additionally, I'd like to, you can go to the next slide, please, Sky. So additionally, I'd like to say that this is also not possible without soil microbiology. And so this slide is just another image of the same thing, in that without soil microbiology, a lot of that aggregation will not occur between the organic matter and the mineral particles. So in this picture, you can see different things such as fungal hyphae and nematodes and amoeba and flagellates and different things that are going to all have different roles in helping to create that aggregation through gums that are made by soil microbiology. And the soil aggregates are clumps of the soil particles. And like I said, they're held together by many of the byproducts that come out of these microbes. So you can move on to the next slide, Sky. Thank you. So basically, to talk a little bit about Soil for Water, our mission in general is to catch and hold more water in the soil. And so since 2015, we've been doing this in a couple of different ways. And our overarching vision is to create a critical mass of landowners who are using regenerative practices to improve soil health and the water cycle. And basically, We do this by way of offering technical assistance to producers. So we do say grazing planning help. Notoriously, we have been working with a lot of grazers, but as we're expanding, we are going to be moving into helping a lot of farmers as well. And farmers have been a part of the program to some degree, but we'll be advancing that technical assistance into the realm of farmers a little bit more in the coming year. So we offer technical assistance, whether it's grazing planning or helping people understand how to do cover cropping and different things like that. Some of our producers use subsoil ripping, and so we've helped connect producers together who can talk about using subsoil ripping to open up their soils and improve the water infiltration into those soils. So technical assistance of all kinds is offered. We also do landowner workshops. So many of our workshops are out in the field where we're showing real-time production methods that people can then utilize. A lot of times these workshops are held in regional areas where the people who come to them are from that area as well. And so when people see what other folks are doing in the same region, they can learn a lot as well. So we try to engage with local producers as well as national experts to offer workshops. And we have developed a peer-to-peer learning network as well, which I'll talk a little bit more about down the line. And then we also do rangeland monitoring in Central Texas. We have 15 ranches that we're doing research trials on here in this area. And all of this has been possible due to our funders that are listed here on the right, the Dixon Water Foundation, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, Southern SARE, which is Southern Sustainable Agriculture and Education, the Meadows Foundation, and Jacob and Therese Hershey Foundation. So we can move on to the next slide, Sky. So ultimately, the Soil for Water program is focused on the beliefs that the idea of saving water is a powerful and low cost, uncontroversial, and underused method of water conservation. It has a lot of effects. So we know that we can get more nutrient uptake by holding more water in the soil. We know that wherever water goes, carbon follows. So carbon can be sequestered by way of holding more water in the soil. We also know that it allows producers to improve their bottom line because it allows for forage or plants in their pastures and fields to stay viable for longer periods of time during the season, which can improve the financial well-being of their operation. So we also believe that the idea of saving water in the soil is a powerful motivator and reason to care about soil health. I don't know a producer who doesn't want to utilize the water that they have coming from the sky more efficiently. And so it definitely makes producers' ears perk up to hear, oh, how can I do that? How can I save more water in the soil? So additionally, we know that farmers learn best from other farmers and ranchers. And so when, as I mentioned before, we have an event where these producers can come together in the same region, same area, and learn from one another about specific things that are they're dealing with from, here in Texas, we are dealing with heat, right? And sometimes in the Texas heat, it can be harder to hold on to organic matter in the soil because it can be consumed, burned up more easily. So producers can share ideas about how they make that work. Maybe it's adding a cover of wood mulch to allow more carbon to go into the soil and also to prevent moisture loss. So a lot of farmers can learn from one another through these peer-to-peer networks. We also believe that stories change behavior, and I'm going to be sharing some stories with you here in a minute, but we believe that these stories can change behavior as much, if not more, than science, oftentimes because they are inspiring and much easier to relate to than maybe a publication paper. Not to knock publication papers, they're wonderful, but ultimately we want to engage people. And so by telling people stories, we have found that to be a really great way to get people on board with the Soil for Water program. So we also believe that landowners will discover soil health and innovations through experimentation. And so one of the things that we try to encourage in our program is for landowners to do their own monitoring, even though we are doing the monitoring on 16 ranches for these particular ranchers. we are greatly encouraging the producers who contact us to set up a little trial on part of their property to see whether their management practices are really making a difference in their soil health. And we teach them how to use soil testing, we teach them how to look at biodiversity factors, we look at percent cover data, or even just taking photo points. So we teach people all different kinds of methods, and we offer a lot of tools from different places that we can recommend to help people learn about their practices and the efficacy of them. We can go on to the next slide, please. All right, so our project activities at this point are to grow our network. And I'll talk a little bit more about this, but as I was mentioning, asking these producers who join our network to do these DIY on-farm trials is a big part of our project. And we're supporting and encouraging these local peer learning groups as well, and doing new monitoring methods and data collection tools. There's a lot of data collection tools out there that are being developed that are online applications that can make monitoring really easy. A lot of producers don't do monitoring because of the time that it can take. And so ultimately, trying to always come up with new methods that can be really quick and easy and not take up too much of a producer's time because they're very busy doing their actual business. So we try to always stay up to date with different methodology that they can use to do data collection as well. So again, the story collection is big. And one of the things that we do these workshops, these webinars for, is so that we can connect with more people. And we always like to hear people's stories. So if you have an interesting story to tell pertaining to regenerative agriculture and holding more water in the soil, we would love to hear it. And you can get Mike and I's email from us at the end of the workshop here. And then additionally, we have a huge amount of publications, videos, workshops that we've recorded, podcasts, and lots of different social media things that you can access via atra.ncat.org. And we like to give those out to people with all of that different activities that we do as well. So next slide, please. This is some pictures of some of the workshops that we've held. And as I mentioned, we like to engage with local folks. So in the bottom left-hand picture, we work with a retired NRCS agent and wildlife biologist named Steve Nelly. And he's a really amazing riparian restoration expert, as well as an amazing botanist. And he does a lot of the plant ID for us in the monitoring that we do. Additionally, he is part of our monitoring team and does all the plant ID for the biodiversity assessments that we do on the 16 different ranches. The woman in the top middle there is Nicole Masters, and she is a renowned agroecologist from New Zealand who knows a lot about soil health and has kind of taken the nation by storm. And so we had her come do a 2-day workshop with us out at Rome Ranch in Fredericksburg, Texas. And I think the bottom right event is an HMI event. So we do a lot of collaborations with different folks to reach different people around the area and allow for local experts and global experts to shine. So additionally, I wanted to let y'all know that we have an upcoming webinar with a woman named Dee Dee Pursehouse on September 20th. And this is a webinar that's going to be open to the public as well. And Dee Dee is the author of Ecology of Care: Medicine, Agriculture, Money, and the Quiet Power of Human and Microbial Communities and Understanding Soil Health and Watershed Function. It's a very long title, but ultimately she teaches participatory workshops helping to show the nested relationships between soil health, human health, water cycles, and climate resiliency. She has a very different approach in how she helps people build frameworks around landscape function and water cycling. So you can go to our website, soilforwater.org, and go to our events page and sign up for that event. We'd love to have you attend that one as well. So ultimately, next slide, please. We have also started our peer-to-peer learning network, And right now, our peer-to-peer network is focused on livestock producers, but come November, that's going to open up and it's going to be nationwide, and it's also going to be for farmers and livestock producers. So currently, we are available as a network to the states that are highlighted in red on the map on the left-hand side. And you can see on the right-hand side, we have an interactive map where our producers who do sign up, it's a password protected map where when they sign up, they can be added to the map, and then producers in specific areas can find one another and communicate with one another and send messages to one another to learn about what each other's doing. So as I said, we started this in 2021. We're growing pretty fast, and we're going to be creating a few more tools, social media tools on our website that should be done by the end of November. One of them, which will be a forum, so that we can have more networking happening on that forum and allow producers to share their stories and share different ideas and research and monitoring tools with one another. So our network is rapidly growing, and we're excited to take it nationally here in November. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, we do perform the research trials. These are a few of the producers that we have trials on. These are a few of the ranches that we have trials on. We're not taking on any more trials ourselves, as I mentioned, but we are encouraging and educating other producers to do that. And today I would like to go ahead and tell you about two of these producers. The bottom left-hand side, that's Orion from Terra Purezza Farm, which we're going to hear from in a video, and then Chris Kroeger from Terra de Esperanza, which is in Hereford, Texas. So before I show the video, I am going to go ahead and give you a little background on Dr. Kroeger and Tina and Orion, and then I'll show the videos back to back. Dr. Kroeger is a local veterinarian and farmer and stockman, and he's a cutting-edge producer of organic crops and livestock. And he's done some really interesting things in finding ways to do more dry land farming, using as little water as possible to sustain his fields by converting them back into native pasture grassland that support cattle. Dr. Kroeger attempts to keep irrigation as his family's farmland in line with the rate of recharge, and he's an advocate of living within our water means, and likened playas on his farmland to a farmer's best friend, a conduit to recharge of the Ogallala aquifer that makes life here sustainable. So by improving the ecology on his land, he's been able to turn a portion of the aquifer that underlies his property into a rechargeable resource. And so he's in Hereford, Texas, and there's a lot of water use that happens in that area from feedlots and farming and different things like that. And so he's figured out a way to at least keep the recharge on his farm not depleting. So he's trying to replenish as much as he's taking, and he's teaching other people how to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, if that's okay, and let y'all hear from Chris himself. All right, I'm going to go ahead and play Chris Kroeger's video here.
Over the last 10 years, what we have done on this property, and granted, you have to realize that in the last 10 years, during the drought times, we do irrigate some crop. We do not irrigate crop to the same intensity that we did prior to 2010, 2011, okay? And what our goal was to see if we could irrigate, if we could take the data that we knew that was discussed about, you know, from our water district and other water districts across the nation, and from some hydrology writings out there, and to see what our recharge rate really was. And so we took this very conservative stance of saying, okay, let's just guess that we recharge 10% of our annual rainfall. We are now having to take a look at it from a little different perspective of how we manage with less water. And by pumping less, what we learned is we learned to monitor our well recovery times, and essentially we are in a county that most years the water table declines at least a foot a year countywide, with areas that have 4 to 6 foot of decline in a year's time. Now, by planting a lot of grass and irrigating less and trying to irrigate to a recharge level, we've essentially, on our Oglala strata of our water table, we've been able to hold it at a steady rate over 10 years. But during the dry years, when we're pumping more, we're going down. But we're finding that we're able to recover that during the wetter times. And so our net change is very close to zero over a 10-year period of time when properties around us continue to decline. And so the thinking was that it was kind of like a big bathtub of water, in that if my neighbor's wells go down, well, then mine must go down. And what we're learning, that's not necessarily the case, that our individual impact on, particularly if you have a reasonable enough land mass, or think in terms of large recharge fields or large well fields, that we can have impacts by changing our operation and trying to maximize the water going into the soil and the water going and maximizing the water that goes into the flies to get it to go into the aquifer. So kind of a thinking through that process, our not scientifically proven goal, but in general terms, this is pretty much our goal, is that we keep 90% of the water that falls on the earth, that 90% of that goes into the soil and is stored rapidly at the time of the rainfall event. We know that we cannot capture 100% of it. We know that 10% of that will, somewhere in that 10% neighborhood, if we're doing a really good job, will run off to the playa, and we hope that we capture 100% of that 10% that goes into the playas for recharge. So that's kind of the way we're looking at it. We're very blessed here that we have an aquifer that takes the water off the surface and away from the wind and evaporation. The big problem here is that we've been culturally and economically, our region has overutilized our skill at pumping the water out. And so the ultimate problem is we're trying to produce more crop for the given amount of water there. And a lot of that probably came from the mindset that, if we don't get it, someone else will, and it doesn't recharge anyway. So it's okay. Is that it fails to recognize the need of future generations of people in the region, many of which might be our family members.
All right, so that was from Chris Kroeger. And before I go on and play Tina and Orion's video, I just want to give a little brief description on them. So Tina and Orion run Terpereza Farm, which was founded in Spicewood, Texas in 2015. And it has grown to over 15 acres of native Texas prairie on multiple campuses, including the Shield Ranch, which is what we're going to see today, which is on Austin's Barton Creek. And also they are working on the Luck Ranch, which is Willie Nelson's ranch in Spicewood, Texas, doing a similar method that they're using on the Shield Ranch. So they have backgrounds in nutrition, agriculture, and conservation ecology. And Tina and Ryan apply multiple approaches to rejuvenate the land for a more resilient food system. But one of the main things that they use hogs to do a pasture reset. And so they have hogs go through an area and root up until all the pasture, they graze in 1/2 acre to 1 acre paddocks, so that the hogs really move through and till everything up to help decrease soil compaction and lay down nutrients through their waste products, as well as to kind of upturn the native seed bank, which then regerminates and has taken the pastures that were overgrazed and they're recovering and healing. So we're going to hear them talk about that. And I will cue up that video.
We had a lot of surface sealing that was happening in the soil, where the cyanobacteria will actually form a protective layer, which happens after a good amount of erosion has occurred, and so it's kind of protecting what it has left, and that happens when there isn't enough ground cover, and so we did have patchiness.
What I would like to inject into regenerative agriculture more is the discussion of breaking up what is preventing water infiltration, effective water infiltration at a rain event. We use a lot of the same language, but then I started going into, okay, well, why? Why is the water sheeting off during a rain event and not going in? And it's because of, tip over this threshold where you have really depleted the seed bank of a lot of the larger, more apex grass species, and all you have are kind of dispersed early successional plants that don't really hold a lot of the soil in, you've got really shallow root systems, that's when it starts to trend off and it's very hard to recover, and those were the conditions here. And we're incredibly proud of how well it's recovered. Everything that might have just been theory before, you know, it hasn't gone perfectly, but we've learned, and what we have now after 2 years is a lot of the species that would not be here if soil conditions had not been improved. The effects of restoring the soil, then the plants above it, then the primary consumers, and then predators has happened in this field before our eyes over the last 2 years.
Yeah, and a lot of that is the observational and qualitative data that we can walk around and see here. But what we're super excited about is the work with Soil for Water, that we can actually go underground. We have 4 different transects that are set up so that we can obtain quantitative data on the actual health of the soil that's happening under our feet. So we're really excited to see those results as they come in. Yeah, so the pigs are what we use as our reset tool, and so they're, if we're going to bring in pigs at all, they're always step number 1. So they have their hooves are going to do a really good job at digging in and creating little pockets and channels in the ground. I'm not sure. In the ground, so that water, it's gonna seep into those little pockets and force infiltrate into the ground. Their rooting behavior is incredible, so they're gonna, again, till. They're basically natural tilling machines. So they're gonna till up your soil for you and break up that surface sealing level that has occurred over continuous overgrazing. And they're going to have a very high nitrogen manure dump. And so those 3 purposes are how we use them in the reset program, and we rotate them onto a plot of land about a ½ acre in size once a week.
Getting into the ground, and so pigs are great at like picking apart that cap and allowing little pockets for the water to settle in, and so they're a multifunctional tool in terms of breaking up surface sealing, being a nutrient dump, and promoting forage, and so you can actually start bringing in a maintaining grazer after that.
All right, so we have a few more slides to show. Sky, if you wouldn't mind putting that back up onto slide 21. And just to give some context also for the terra pareza, after they do the reset, the pasture reset with the hogs, they then graze the same pastures with poultry and lamb and sheep. So ultimately, they only bring the hogs through once, and then they continue the grazing with different livestock that aren't as intense as hogs. So it's kind of the first step for getting land ready to graze other animals in a multi-species fashion. So that was from a few of our producers there. We've got a lot of other stories like that. It's very fascinating and really fun to be involved with hearing each of these different producers' stories. A lot of very innovative people out there. So it's wonderful work, and please stay tuned because we'll be sharing a lot more stories in the future. But ultimately, what we would love for you to do today is to stay in touch with our project, and you can go to soilforwater.org and sign up for our emails so you can get news updates and event updates, and that can be done at soilforwater.org. Right now, we are accepting producers, livestock producers in any of those 8 states that I mentioned before. So if you're in one of those states and you're a livestock producer and you'd like to join the network, you can apply online on our network enrollment page, and we'd love to have you. And then for educators and agency staff, we'd love to collaborate with you guys. So if you would like to put on a workshop, a Soil for Water workshop together, or you might like to start your own project and have us help, we're always working in collaboration with other organizations on different grants and things of that sort. So we'd be glad to be in discussion about some of those things. And then please tell us about the success stories that you're hearing about in the work that you do. Direct people to our website. If there's somebody out there that you know would like to have more information on a particular problem they're dealing with, send them to our forum. And that forum should be up in the next 2 weeks, and they can ask the question to that forum, and a lot of producers and technical assistant providers such as myself and many other people at Ncat can help them answer those questions. So next slide, please. I'll just leave this up while we're asking questions, but y'all can use this QR code to visit our website or just go to soulforwater.org.